Yo, checking in. This is Craig Pinkney, Criminologist Urban Youth Specialist, Street Academic. You're listening to the Us People podcast. Make sure you tune in for that wisdom, knowledge, and understanding.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Us People podcast. I'm your host, Savia Rocks, and today I'm humbled to have Craig, who is an urban youth specialist, a visiting lecturer, and a PhD researcher and director. Craig, thank you so much for coming on the Us People podcast. How are you?
Thank you, and I'm good, and morning, and hello, and all of them nice things. Wagwan as well.
Yes, say that too, yes. Everybody of every culture is always welcome on the Us People podcast, so I love it. The first thing I always ask everyone who comes on the podcast is a little bit about their background and a little bit about themselves. So, Craig, could you tell me a little bit about your background and where you grew up and where you was brought up and how that influenced you to be the caring person that you are today?
Wow. From Birmingham, inner city, Northwest Corridor, from an area called Hockley, Winson Green. I would say that this work is in my DNA. My grandparents, Mavis and Rudolph Pinkney, started a project called the Nightingale Project. When our people came post the Windrush, and started a community organization from their household. They were pioneers in the community of Birmingham, of which they were part of the Muhammad Ali Center. So when Muhammad Ali came over many, many years ago, he came to my grandmother's house. So the kind of, I would say that community work and working with people is in my DNA. You know, it's something that, as I said, my grandparents kind of, that was their life work. And as, grandchildren, I think all of us in our family are kind of that way inclined. So I just think that young people has always kind of been a passion of mine, growing up in an inner city area and seeing a lot of things, both good and bad, and kind of felt that if I ever wanted to leave, I wanted to come back with something. And that's what I did. But I came back with knowledge, but not knowledge that was just going to be something that was just point of rhetoric, but knowledge that was going to push people to a particular space, particular level, in best ways possible.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. How was your family life when you were growing up, in the sense of let's talk a little bit, because I was watching one of your interviews, okay? And there was something that you said that triggered something within me to ask you this question. Yeah. And particularly it was about the men who were in your life. Yeah. Now, the reason why I asked this question is because you seem to be mentored by a lot of influential men in your life. But the other question to attach to that is, if you didn't have those influential men in your life, how do you think you as a person would have become?
I think I was fortunate in the sense that where I grew up, there wasn't many young people or my friends that had fathers. They did have fathers, but were absent in their lives. I had that privilege of, when I was outside at 5 minutes over my due time, I had my dad cussing and shouting and telling me hurry up and come back to the house. Weekends, my dad would always bring me to Saturday school. My dad would always bring me to martial arts. He'd always bring me to swimming. So I always kind of had that male consistent role in my life. But I also had my granddad around me. I had my uncles around me that were also consistent in my life. So I was privileged in that sense compared to some of my next door neighbors, that many of them kind of grew up to doing other things. So I kind of believe that was actually significant in terms of my developing my masculinity. But then as I've kind of got older, I've kind of always benefited and, always appreciated that consistent males. And as you said, from that previous interview, I've always really, really kind of valued and been humbled the fact that I've had so many consistent males in my life that continue to guide me, continue to mentor me, and ensure that my thinking next to my practice is in line, that I'm kind of doing the right thing.
Yeah, no, that sounds perfect. How did your journey begin? And the transformation, especially when you're being like a transformational speaker or an inspirational speaker, especially when it comes to youth and violence and conflict, how does that all work for you? How did you get inspired?
My inspiration it's a really good question because I oftentimes think to myself, when was the actual trigger? But
Yeah.
that's why I said in the original question, I would just believe as I've got older, I've realized it's part of who I am and it's part of the family that I've ultimately come from. And, I kind of was the statistic like most young people within schools nowadays. I left school with no GCSEs. The only GCSE that I did have was drama, which is interesting. So when I wanted to go to college, I couldn't do the qualifications that I wanted to because I left school with obviously minimum grades and I couldn't really get onto a program. However, they had this kind of, it's not even a level 3, it's below level 3. It was kind of like you do this for like 2 years and then work up to a space where you're actually in line with everybody else. So in my original part of education, leaving school, I felt like I was already on the back burner because when I then completed that course, the people that I was joining on the course with were already 3 years younger than me. So I kind of felt like the old head in the classroom, and it was very immature the way that they were. So I just kind of felt like I was always kind of out of place. But whilst I kind of started those college experiences, I used to play for a local basketball team. And the coach at the time had a charity organization where we used to actually go out and work with children and young people. And I would say that's how it kind of started. But I just didn't know I was doing youth work then. It was just kind of a thing that I did just to make a bit of money. And I think it was only until I had a basketball injury and then I was met with another mentor that's a friend of the family that kind of said to me, you know what, you'd be good as a youth worker. And obviously at that particular time, I didn't really understand what youth work was. And then when they started to put me on training programs and kind of courses around mentorship, around youth work, that was kind of what triggered the practical side of what I then become. And then I think further on when I then finished college, because I left the drama course because I felt like it just wasn't for me. And then I went on to a course in sport. I think both of them was a bad idea anyway, but you kind of just do anything that your qualifications allow you to do when you're at that age.
That's true.
So whilst I was at college, I just thought to myself, whilst I'm doing sport as well, I might as well just get there at least the minimum grades that get me to a place that I actually can do something with. So when those mentors at the time had said to me, listen, all you need to get is this to get into university, I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna crack at it and do the things that I need to do. So when I finally got to university to do my interview and they looked at my track sheet, I already could see their eyes looking like, why? These ain't no close to no C's in this situation. I was honest with them and said, listen, I know what the paper says, but I know what I've got here. And I believe that what I have here and what I have here is going to be able to benefit some other people. And my dad used to always say to me, I got the gift of the gab, or I chat too much. What I used to say. And I guess it just worked out that I always find myself in situations that I'm always able to talk myself out of. So I believe that's a gift that's been passed down to me, I believe, from my grandparents and those that came before. So
it's not a bad gift to have, believe me. It's not a bad gift to have.
When you're in trouble,
I'm telling you. Let's talk a little bit about criminology. Talk to me about how you got into criminology and what inspired you to educate yourself about it.
The passion for criminology. So I did my degree in youth and community studies. After I graduated, I had a really interesting opportunity to be a senior youth worker at a youth centre in Birmingham. It was a youth centre that is well known within the community. It used to be a building that used to hold a lot of community events. And at those particular community events, marriages. I remember my parents and their wedding reception was there. Christenings. A lot of my early childhood memories, I actually remember going there. Some sort of community event. But what had happened was early 2000s, there was a murder outside of the building at a community barbecue.
Oh my gosh.
The city council kind of felt that they didn't want to utilize that building anymore for community events. So the city council changed the building from a community centre to a youth centre.
Okay.
So when it became the youth centre under Birmingham City Council, I guess that history and memory of that building kind of continued. So a lot of people would show up thinking, they could do an event there, but realizing actually it was a youth center. But not only that, you still had young people in the community that kind of felt, it's a bit dangerous to go to that building because of the previous incident. So I actually remember seeing the ad in the Birmingham Mail at the time. It was called the Evening Mail before it became the Birmingham Mail. I remember seeing an ad for a senior youth worker, and it was a good salary. And I was thinking, every week, why ain't nobody applying for it? So I applied for the job. Went for an interview. I remember seeing some of my old mentors also apply for the job. So I kind of went in there thinking, I ain't got no chance. But as I said previously, I got gifted a gab and somehow got myself the job. But when I landed there on my first day of work, I remember there was this little old man in the back, and he seen me and said, "Oh, you new fish." And I kind of said to him, like what's that? He was just telling me about how many workers had left on stress and the way that the young people were behaving. So I realized that was the reason why it was in the ad for so long, because of what was happening in the building. But anyway, I tackled it head on. And really kind of made some real significant changes in the building, the type of young people that I had in the building. But one of the things that I consistently started seeing was a lot of the young boys that I was working with found themselves getting caught up in road, getting caught up in criminality, getting caught up in situations that was either putting their lives in danger or putting their family in danger. And that was kind of where my passion of criminology ultimately started, because I wanted to understand the experiences of Black young males through the documentation that I had, and to ask the fundamental questions why. So I would say that the PhD mindset started from then, before I even started the master's degree, because the questions that I was asking was similar to your original question. Why is it that individuals like myself didn't end up caught up many of the young people that I grew around, and also the young people that I was working with? And absent fathers was one of the key things. And a lot of the things that I kind of witnessed and experienced with those young men, they just needed Black men consistency in their lives that were ultimately going to show them a different form of masculinity compared to what they're used to seeing. Because the form of masculinity that they always get is a toxic one. It's about madness. It's about aggression. It's about treating people a particular type of way. Whereas what I'm saying is, I can be hyper masculine. I can be hype. I can be loud, but I don't have to be doing the madness. And that's kind of where that started. So when I did my master's degree in criminology, I wouldn't say that I learned anything more so. I would say what the master's degree did for me was enable me to kind of critically analyze and ask questions that enable me to arrive at different spaces. And then after, obviously, the criminology degree, I started to do a series of projects in the community that really kind of started to look at the impact of absent fathers, the impact of violence. And I would say it was only from that which then kind of introduced into the work that I was doing in the community. And then I was invited to a TED Talk. The whole world then understood who Craig was. But I would say I've been doing the same thing for years. So a lot of people that kind of hear me and say, oh, you've been doing some stuff quite recently, I would say that I've been doing this stuff a while ago. I think what was significant, which links to your other question about mentorship, is that the mentor that I had, Dr. Martin Glynn, at the time, he was doing his PhD.
Okay.
But he was doing his PhD in America, and he was traveling to different places. And at that time, when he was doing some stuff in Baltimore, he met a community organization that utilized social media really well in their local community. And I would say when Martin kind of demonstrated how these organizations in Baltimore was doing their work, I would say I was probably one of the first to utilize social media in order to capture an audience. So if you look on my YouTube page in the early videos, you'd see me standing in front of the camera talking about, yo, young people checking in. And I would always just give a little bit of science for about 5 minutes and drop out. No other youth worker was doing things like that in that way at that time, talking about 2009, 2010, 2011. And I think that's how I kind of got that popularity nationally, and then internationally, people started to knock the doors. So, so one year I was in Ireland, another year I was in America, another year I was in Sweden, Romania, and then America started to call, and then I found myself in Jamaica a couple of years ago. So it showed that social media, actually, when we're talking about counter narratives to capture the minds from different spaces, is actually a really essential tool. And then when we just look at now and what everybody's kind of doing around social media, everybody's gully. But all I'm saying is, from a youth work perspective, that's what I started to do in order to kind of capture the minds. So it was kind of like a radical form of youth work, which kind of embodied the concept that I kind of created around on-road youth work, because that's ultimately what it is. So when people say to me, what is it that you do that's different, that's radical? It's that concept of on-road youth work, where you take youth work to wherever it is. So whether that's Nando's, whether that's Asda, whether you're in a laundrette, whether you're in a local barbershop, wherever young people are and the issues that they have are, you bring the youth work ultimately to them, and you don't have that traditional mindset that young people have to come to your building, come to your organization, you meet them at one particular location. No, it's actually radical in the sense that if a young person phones today, you land wherever they are.
I like that. I like that concept, because a lot of people don't have that concept. Then that's perfect. One question that I really wanted to ask you is when you're in front of a police force,
yes,
and you're about to have a conversation with them,
mm-hmm.
How do you feel before you even start speaking, knowing that they will most probably judge you first before you have any judgment of them?
I would say everybody judges me because I look a particular way, and I'm very clear that I don't believe I need to change who I am, what I look like, in order for people to hear what I'm saying. So I've been to a number of conferences. I remember being in France at a conference, which was interesting. And I remember there was kind of like a little bit of like a lunch before the event. And I remember sitting, and I just remember I think I might have had my fitted hat on, my T-shirt, my Air Max 1s. And I just was like eating the lunch and whatever. And I noticed that people just keep looking at me, and it's kind of like that look like, are you in the right event, mate, type of look. And then, some woman kind of approached me, and, they do that kind of minimal conversation, but really they just want to ask me the question, what am I doing here type of thing. So she started to talk to me. She was pleasant. And then she said, what is it that you do? The event, like basically, what are you here for ultimately? I said, I'm your keynote speaker for the day. And you just should have seen her face. But then it was interesting because then the male next to her, he kind of like, it's like he wasn't convinced. So then he asked a series of questions, and the questions I always find in my experiences in these particular spaces is that then they'll start asking me about my qualifications, So when I started wheeling off the degrees that I had, and the experience that I had, it was almost like, oh, okay, wow. Because clearly in their mind, I didn't fit what the knowledge and expertise ultimately come with. And when situations like that happen, so like to your question, I always open with how I feel. I always open. So, I'll go to a conference and say, it's been a bit of a weird one because, I was eating lunch, and I'll kind of talk about what was happening, and this is how it makes me feel. And you might have a few red faces in the building, but what I want people to recognize is the concept of unconscious bias. What I want people to recognize is that we judge people even in a professional capacity. So if you're doing this in a professional capacity, what are you doing in community? What are you doing within society? So it's my little way of naming and shaming and calling racism and calling prejudice and injustice and any form of unconscious bias where it's at.
How do you feel about the young men? So
how do I feel about what? Sorry?
Young men. So for instance, when it comes to young men and how they get into violence, or violence becomes something or part of them because of them not having a father, or can you explain the scientific background? I know it's about them maybe not having their fathers, but how can we as a community come together so even if they don't have their fathers, we can help them?
I think it goes even further than that. Before we even start talking about the young men, we have to talk about the society that we're in.
That's true.
We live in a violent society. and the society that we live in perpetuates violence at every single level, from cartoons, from games, from films, from documentaries, from drama series, from everyday soaps. So violence is something that is in the DNA of Western society. So before we start there and start talking about young people, because there is a danger that when we have these conversations and talk about young men and black young men, we kind of talk about it like it's almost synonymous.
Yes,
but
that's
it's
true.
not.
That's true.
So I don't believe in these concepts of black and black violence and all of these things that we hear our people talking about, because it's untrue in the concept that if you're going to talk about black and black violence, you have to talk about white on white violence, and you have to show me then the statistics on Eastern violence and all these other kind of things that we hear about. So while that ultimately is said, when we understand the cycle of violence that exists within our society, it's important to understand that different people are going to be adversely impacted by that violence. So if you're going to talk about black communities as a whole, we also have to look at the historical context of colonialism, the Windrush, individuals that have come to the country and haven't been given a fair opportunity to be able to do things. Because when you actually check it, and even if we went back from a historical perspective, from the Windrush era, none of our people came to this country with criminal records.
That's true.
They all come highly skilled, highly qualified. So what happened 2 generations down, that now the grandchildren of the individuals that came with all the skills and all the knowledge to build Great Britain and make it great, why are many of them now involved in the situation that they are? Because they've come into an environment that's created that mindset. So it's important that we have that conversation first, because whilst I understand the question, it's also about holding people accountable before we start talking about where we're at.
That's true. I agree with you there.
Once we do that, then we're able to have a more scientific discussion about then what do we ultimately do next. So when you have a community that has been stopped from getting resources, stopped from having the opportunity to have the same plain level opportunity like everybody else, there's already a deficit. And wherever you find a deficit, you're always going to find people that are going to make risky decisions in order to ensure that their basic needs of survival is ultimately met. And what you have and what you find is communities that are ultimately impacted by that. So then let's go fast forward, and then we can look at, the idea of institutionalized racism. So we know that, we can go back to the SOS law. That's my parents' generation, and the way that they were treated by the state. And what happened, you had individuals that galvanized, come together in terms of community activists that were fighting against injustice, fighting against oppression, fighting against state violence. But what happened to those individuals? Many of them were sectioned under the Mental Health Act. Many of them got thrown into prison. So now we're talking about children of those individuals. So you have to follow the story. So then now you've got children that are of those individuals that were political, that were activists and fighting for freedom, justice, and equality. And interestingly enough, post-1986, crack cocaine mysteriously comes into the country, and then the same activists and those same individuals from any community that were fighting against injustice are the same communities that then started utilizing those particular things and started bringing that into their own communities. So we have to track the story. We can't just go in and start talking about our problems without talking about what we like to talk about is the scab. But what we don't want to talk about is the open wound. And what I'm talking about as the continuum of these issues that's affected Black communities is the open wound. So we have to talk about racism. We have to talk about the system of white supremacy. We have to talk about trauma. We have to talk about intergenerational trauma. Yes. We have to talk about the fact that communities for a very long time have been stopped and prevented from having finance. And that's the reason why many of our communities had the system of partner, because the banking system couldn't help us. Yes, so when other communities were able to come to the country from wherever they come from and was able to galvanize and start business and utilize economics as a tool in order to support their communities and grow the wealth within their communities, many Black communities was held back and wasn't given those opportunities. So now we fast forward into the 80s and 90s and 2000s, where we've got children of those individuals that were affected, impacted, killed by the state. And then now we've got these young people, and now we're looking at them and saying, why are they behaving the way that they're behaving? So whilst now we understand the problem and we understand the cause of the problem, the conversation now is about what is the solution. So now, to answer to your question, we have to then talk about therapy. We have to talk about then trauma. We have to talk about that intergenerational pain that enables us to get to a space of healing. And then once we start to do things like that, then we have to now have conversations about economics. How do we come together and utilize economics in order to create, to build, to sustain legacies within our community, where we have, our communities that can ultimately benefit from, whether that is things like supermarkets, whether that's like retail stores, whether that's like schools, whether that's nurseries, buildings that we actually can use to ensure that we can create something for ourselves. Then we have to talk about politics and what is the role of our people, and those of us that are politically in tune, how can we support them in ensuring that the needs of our community are ultimately met. And then we also have to kind of talk about, because I believe this is a spiritual warfare as well, where our people have been destroyed for 500 years, 300 years before that, when we talk about the Arab slave trade.
Yes.
So we've always been taken away from who we are, what we are, and we need to kind of reclaim our connectivity back to the Most High. So now that you know that is the creation of what I now call the new monster, what social media has now done is kind of created a distraction.
Yeah, manipulated.
And that distraction has made us forget about all of the things that have been impacting us by the things that I have just ultimately mentioned. And then we have an issue like George Floyd that reminds us of the system that I've been just talking about. And it's those types of scenarios that make us then think, wow, this is what's really happening. But we can go back to Rodney King's video and it was the same thing. There's so many different things. We can go back even further, where we can look at lynchings, we can look at the way that people were treated by the police. And then even if from an English and a British context, we can look at articles where many of our people have been choked and strangled. We may not necessarily get shot, but we get choked and strangled just as much as many of them do in America. So there's a whole disparity when we're talking about the way in which Black people are treated within society. So when you look at the concept of gang and the concept of the way in which young people behave within our society is kind of a outcome of the society in which they live in. So as I say to young people and I say to people in general, I don't actually have a problem with gangs. What I have a problem with is violence.
Yes.
What I have a problem with is exploitation. Because if we're talking about gang as a surrogate family, and the reason why they join that gang is because they have unfulfilled met needs, then why wouldn't they join?
Yeah.
Problem is that when they start harming each other, when they start harming their own communities, that's what we're fighting against. We're fighting against that toxic mindset that makes them believe that those that look like them are their true enemy. And they're not their true enemy. Their enemy is the one that's put them into the condition that enables them to behave like that. So that's where I like to take this conversation when people mention the point about Black boys. And as I said, I'm very clear that sometimes by default, when many of our people have these conversations, we don't talk about that. So those that are viewing these things would hear it and assume by default that when we're talking about violence within communities, it's synonymous with Black.
No.
Just like if we were to talk about terrorism, by default, people think synonymously we're talking about Muslim people. So it's important that we kind of make these things very clear before we have these conversations.
No, I like the fact that you broke that down in every single step, because that's what I want from people when I ask them the questions. I want a challenge. I want people to pull out things from the question that I've asked and transition it into knowledge and education so that people can understand and become better within themselves. So thank you so much for doing that, because not a lot of people do that. Yeah. So one of the questions that I also have for yourself, and this is purely about you, is what life experience has happened to you? Because I think I saw a video where police came to you, if I'm correct. I don't know if this is correct, but what has happened to you in that changed your whole vision of police and how they do things. Has anything ever happened to you, Craig, where you can say, wow, the police are doing it not correct because it's happened to you yourself?
No, not necessarily directly to me, but family members, close friends. You know, we've all been stopped by the police. And I'm not going to attest on that. Like when I had a stop and search that, you know, anything crazy happened.
Yeah.
Didn't. But, you know, growing up and hearing about family members that were fatally harmed by the police, growing up in an environment and hearing of friends that had been killed by the police and not seeing any justice, you know, working with young people and witnessing, you know, them coming to centres in the building that I used to manage with bruises all over their faces and said the police officer just punched me up. And hearing about those types of things and then thinking, is this really happening in our community?
Yeah.
And it's funny because when we tell our stories, this is the conversation I think we don't also have when we talk about white privilege. And I hope that for those that may be viewing this, that are white, that are interested in thinking about, you know, how do they, you know, support the black plight for justice. It's also about understanding what that white privilege is. And what I've always found is that when I'm having this conversation with people that look like me, they just get it. But I feel like when I explain this to my white counterparts, it's almost like I have to give them a very strange story and one that seems like it makes sense in order to justify what I'm talking about. So sometimes it's not necessarily things that have happened directly to me, but individuals that look like me. But this is where we talk about intergenerational trauma, which was the point that I was just trying to make. And what I mean by intergenerational trauma as it relates to black people is that when one of our people get harmed, no matter where they are across the globe, we feel that.
Yeah, that's true.
Whether a man's getting strangled in Wales, whether a youth's getting gripped up in London, whether a man is being disrespected or a woman's been disrespected in South Africa, we feel it. We feel it because our hearts are connected based on that injustice. So if you are not in tune with that injustice, it's very hard for me to explain to you what I'm feeling. It's very hard for me to explain to you what is going on in terms of my processing of that information and my feelings around the behaviors of what I'm ultimately witnessing. So growing up in a community and working in the same community, I hear about and see too many scenarios that make me think that that could be me, that make me think that that could be my brother, that make me think that that could be my son, that could make me think that, you know what, that could be one of my nephews or one of my nieces. So whilst that exists within the minds and the hearts of our people from an intergenerational traumatic perspective, it's those things that inspire me to want to challenge those systems. And I think that's the reason why I've always pushed myself to be educated, because I understand that when we talk about fighting the system in a range of different ways, it requires foot soldiers at every different level. So like, for example, in terms of the protests that have previously happened, I say that it's important that we all understand what our roles and responsibilities are, because I understand how the system works. And this is a friendly critique to our people. Mm-hmm. And I want people to follow me on this one. I'm not disagreeing with the concepts of protesting, but I believe everybody, like an army, has a role. So when I seen some of our people that were celebrities in the protest, my initial thoughts were, you don't need to be there.
Thank you.
And what I mean by that is that not that your voices, not that your power and your passion is not worthy, is that we need you to stay where you're at and bring us in when the time is there. And I'll utilize the example of Stormzy, because we know Stormzy was very vocal. We know Stormzy was out there with the people in London in those protests. And I'm not going to say I don't rate that, but I know how the system works. And if a fight did break out in Trafalgar Square that day, and they were just looking for random people, they could have easily said Stormzy was one of those individuals that were involved in that particular incident. But then what does that happen in terms of the amazing charity stuff that he's doing with people in education from Black communities and people of color? So then they will stop those scenarios from happening just because they don't like the fact that you're there. So the point that I'm making is those of us that are in positions of power, we need to come together and have more strategic conversations about what we're supposed to be doing in a time of crisis. And what we're supposed to be doing in a time of crisis enables us to mobilize and do whatever. So the youth, them, we can guide them when they step out. Our people from the community, we can guide them when they step out. But once we've made the noise, saying that we want freedom, justice, and equality, then individuals like myself step in. Now tell us what are the demands, and we will take that to those individuals and we will articulate it in a way that we can make our demands ultimately met. And then we start to talk to our individuals in our community that have knowledge in economics. Then we start to talk to people in our community that have knowledge in politics. And then we do all of those different things and come together. So then we see the types of changes that we ultimately want, that's going to ultimately benefit us. But when all of us are on the playing field, when all of us are on the battlefield, knowing that they can take us out, that's where it becomes problematic. So we have to think like soldiers. We almost have to be very militant and radical in the way that we're thinking in order to engage. And when I use the term radical, it's important that we also break terminologies down, because radical doesn't mean extreme. Extreme means that individuals, have a particular plan and they ain't trying to have no reasoning. Radical is changing the mindset and the thought processes that we want a new paradigm in order to create something that we want to sustain and help for ourselves. Yes. So I'm utilizing words, and I don't want people to lose that and then switch off when they hear words, because sometimes language is interesting, that even when our people go into certain spaces, they will utilize language in order to stop us from doing and saying the things that we want to say. That's why I'm a lover of Malcolm X, because he was an individual that studied the dictionary and understood what words ultimately meant. And I think with that being said, I think that is what's really important when we talk about our journey, when we talk about how do we move forward as a community, not to just support each other, but ultimately how do we support the youth?
Yeah, that was the best. I think that's one of the best answers I've had when it comes to answering a question. So there's another one I have for you, okay? And how hard is it? Because I know this is hard. This is not the first time I've asked someone this question. How hard is it to keep youth's attention when it comes to educating them and helping them?
I don't find it hard at all. Why? Because as an educator, as an informal educator, I understand that the way that the brain works. Problem is that we always use formal education. We use formal education thinking that formal education is for all. So as an informal educator, I know that people have got different learning styles. Some people like sitting down and talking. Some people like reading. Some people want you to show and then demonstrate what it is that you're trying to teach them, and then enable them to try and do that. And then there's some young people that like a bit of everything.
Yeah.
Whilst I know that engaging with certain types of young people, that they're not going to learn one particular type of way. So I need to change that up to keep their brains going, to keep their interests going, and then ultimately enable them to be part of that journey to say how they also want to learn. So I only find people that struggle with young people that don't understand the different learning needs of different types of young people.
Okay, now that's fair enough. What's your favorite word when it comes to inspiring people? So if you had to choose one word that you would say to someone when you are helping them to inspire them, what one word would you use? I got him thinking. Because words are powerful.
Yeah, I use a number of words, but I think I'm trying to think of the word that I think I use more consistently with young people. Got me today. I think if I was to use a word, it would be mindset.
That's actually a good one, actually. No one said that to me yet.
because ultimately it is about changing mindsets.
That's true. That
You
is
know, when
very
we
true.
talk about the journey of our people and our young people, my work is solely challenging particular fixed mindsets. So when I engage with young people and I engage with professionals that seek to work with young people, it's about changing that mindset.
Yeah.
We have to think different if we want to move different.
You have to come out of the box. You have to come out of the box.
You know, sometimes I say just kick the box to the side. You know, we as a people throughout our history has gone through a very significant and impactful journey. But whilst we talk about that particular journey, I also recognize that every generation does something in order to benefit the next. So when we say things like, you know, I don't see anything changing, to some extent that is true. But then when we think about it and the opportunities that we are enabled to have, that enables us to have a better voice. Because remember, there was a time in life where we didn't have a voice. These things couldn't happen. You as a woman couldn't even chat to me on anything right now. So I want our people to follow me. I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not doing a Kanye West right now, so don't try to shoot me. What I am saying though is that every generation has done something that's enabled our generation to be able to have that better conversation about how we can free our people. I think that's probably the better way that I can phrase it. So with the work that we're doing right now in challenging the systems that adversely impact the lives of our communities and our children and our young people, we would hope that our next generation of young people benefit from these conversations that we're having right now, that put them in a better space of understanding that they can attack the system without necessarily having to worry about the things in which have prevented us to get to certain places. So like how when we're talking about strategy, for example, so we know that more of our people are going to get killed, unfortunately. We know that many of our people are still going to get stopped and searched. We know that our people are still going to get sentenced harshly. We know our people are going to get sectioned under the Mental Health Act. We know that there's going to be a disparity across criminal justice, across healthcare, across education, across entertainment, across media, across art. Every facet of society, we know that post this conversation, our people are still going to be adversely impacted. You know why? Because the system that was created to benefit specific people, those individuals that created it are going to fight just as hard to sustain it as much as we're trying to dismantle it. So whilst I understand that that will happen, when our youth watch this in the future, they can say, this is what we need to do. So there is no long thing with the conversations about what do we need to do next, because we looked at the journeys of Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner, Frederick Douglass, Franz Fanon, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, the Deacons of the Defense, the Black Panther Party, and we can go through a whole list of our freedom fighters that give us an understanding of, okay, this is what we need to do. And then we look at Marcus Mosiah Garvey and we look at other people and say, okay, that was what we created. This is what we need to do. But because we've got so many distractions, we need to get back to that. So what we're indicating to the young people that may be watching this moving forward is stay away from the distractions, because the distractions is what's going to deter you away. So big distractions like carnivals next week, for example. Big distraction like there's a big rave coming up soon. Big distraction like 50% of all restaurants are, half free. Distractions like, trainers now are on sale again. Those are the things that are going to keep us away from focusing what we need to focus on. And as I said, the system understands how to stop us from being focused on our aims and our objectives as it goes to the journey of trying to get our freedom. So I'm not saying that we can't go out. I'm not saying that we can't have nice things. But what I'm saying is don't forget what the passion is. Don't forget what the objective is, because ultimately that's what's going to stop us from achieving those particular goals. So currently I'm in conversations with people from my local community, because I'm saying I want to do something different. You know, I've been asked to come to sit on a number of panels with people, and they say, you know, they want better experiences for our children, they want better experiences for our young people. You know, we want to develop programs. And I said, you know what? I don't want to develop programs anymore, because it's something I do anyway. What I'd rather do is be part of an entity of people that are going to put their money up, so we can say, this is what we want. We want a nursery. Okay, cool. Let's create a system that every month everybody chips in. And then, you know what? At the end of that, 3, 4 years, 5 years, we're going to have a building, and this is what we're going to do with it. Then that's the legacy. Because you know, and I know, and I just like to be real because I'm a realist, is that you'll do a program, and yes, young people will be inspired. Yes, they'll be impacted. Guess what? Young people may even have better opportunities, which is cool. I'm down with. But I want things that are long sustaining.
Yeah, longevity.
And these are the things that, when we look at other communities, is what they invest in: property, buildings, to ensure that those things are ultimately there. And that's what I want to try. That's ultimately different. And I hope that those that are watching this, that hear these kind of points and these little gems that we're both making, and think, you know what, maybe it is about changing it up and doing things different. And whilst I say that 2020, I say, is the year of change. 2020 is the year of creativity. 2020 is the year of entrepreneurship. And those that I know that are out there being very creative have become very successful quite recently. So we know that whilst technology allows us to connect through Zoom, through Instagram, through Snapchat, through YouTube, or whatever it is, or what platforms we use, we can make things happen.
Most definitely. No, I definitely agree with that. It's hard because there's so many things that I do want to talk to you about, and there's so little time as well. So, but one of the things that I do want to talk about is, how do your family feel about you doing this?
How do my family feel?
Yeah.
My family do this as well.
I know, yeah.
It's part of the culture, you know, and I think that, you know, that's the understanding. I guess one of the things that I kind of always make sure that I bring to the table is that we as a family make sure that we have time out.
Yes, I was going to say.
So we travel a lot. You know, as a family, you know, we travel a lot. We go to so many different places, you know, Africa, you know, I'll try and make us see the world because it's important. But whilst I say that, it's also important to understand economics as well, which is something that I make sure that my family understand. You know, even my little cousins, they understand economics. So what I mean by that is, one of the things that I remember watching an interview, and I think this is probably one of the bigger gems that for me, that really changed my mindset, was I remember watching an interview of one of the assistants and followers of Malcolm X.
Yes.
And she said, with all of the brilliance that Malcolm X brought to the world, and with all of the amazing things that he'd done in terms of Black consciousness and Black thought, when he got executed, his family was left with nothing. Nothing in the sense of, from an economic perspective, that the fact of their house was in danger of going. They had to sell items from their housing in order to be able to eat. And why she mentioned that is because many of us that go into this work around community, go into this work about helping each other, sometimes we think that working in community means that we give ourselves for free. And whilst we do that, we oftentimes forget and negate our own responsibilities and our own duties to support our own families. So too many times I see individuals that do the work that we do, that go into this work, that can't even provide for their own children, can't even provide for themselves. And they have this mindset of, oh yeah, it's the community. But I'm just going to say this and let's be, and as I said, I like to be a realist, but guess what? If Carnival was tomorrow and everybody set up stores and had whistles and had CDs and mixtapes and had things that people can consume, guess what? People are going to buy it. So what's there to think that when you're helping the community to support, guide, children and young people and families to get to the next level that they can sustain for themselves. Why is that such a crime to ask for finances in order to be able to do that? That's the mindset that has been passed down to us by that same system that we're referring to, because it puts us in a state where we're solely dependent on the state and we don't think about how we can be economic within the community that can sustain ourselves. What I am not saying is that we need to come into the community and suck the blood from our community like other communities have. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is we need to think about and consider. And I'm never forgetting, this is my last point, working with a student of mine that has an amazing organization in Manchester. I won't say his name on this platform, but he does loads of sport and engaging young people. And I remember going to see him just to check on him and, see how he was doing. And he said he's been having these blackouts. And he said, he's just been overly stressed. He's been working left, right, and center. And I said to him, you know what, big man, you need a holiday. He said, boy, I can't even afford a holiday right now, Craig. I said, holiday? I'm looking on your Instagram, I'm looking on your Facebook, and everything seems to be working. And he says, I do this all for free. And I said, why? Because I can't charge the community, man. So I said, with all of the football academies and teams that you're running in the local community, you mean to tell me you can't charge the Pinkney them £3? No, I can't do that. I can't do that. I said, but why? Because if this was a local football team, they would pay £15 and £20. So why can't they pay £3 to you? And I said, better still, if there are children that come from families that genuinely can't afford, then you use your discretion. You don't need to tell everybody that you're allowing 5 families or 10 families to come through your academy and train for free. He said, you know what? I didn't even think of it like that. I said, that's the mindset. So whilst you're killing out yourself in order to ensure that everybody's being catered for, not only your health is in danger, but your children are looking up at you like, what's the point of you even doing youth work if you ain't even got time for me? And then when your child becomes 16, 17 and touches road, what then do you have to say to your child? And I've seen that happen so many different times. And if someone said to me, what is my biggest fear? That's my biggest fear. That my child doesn't grow up and look at me and say, you know what, you've done so much work with other people's kids and you didn't see me right in front of you. So when my son asks for things, I'll say things like last year, my son said to me, you know what, I'm doing this project at school about ancient Egypt. I said, in December, we're going to Egypt and we're going to the pyramids. We're going to Luxor. We're going to go to the tombs so you can see for yourself what you're learning in your classroom.
That's true.
So when you go back to school, you can say to them, not only was I doing homework on it, me and my dad flew out and we went there and we had a look at the tombs. We've seen the gold for itself. We've seen the artwork for itself in a real sense and not necessarily in the book. And I pride my whole experience and the work that I do to ensure that there's enough finance within my family that if my children ask for those things, we do it. We play this thing where we spin the globe and where do we want to go to next? So what I'm trying to say is a gem here that we can't forget the mission, but not think about the economics that enable us to move forward. And these are the conversations that we need to be having more, not just about the work, but how we're going to sustain it. Yeah. And I think when we start to have those conversations, then we become a force that cannot be reckoned with.
I agree. What was the best advice you've ever had, Craig?
The best advice that I've ever had?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Stay in your lane and don't get distracted.
That is good advice.
Do what you do well. Don't allow people to come in and tell you what you should be doing. Rather, you stay in your lane and you do it well. And what I mean by that is I have a lot of people that will email me, message me, or go to events. Oh, Craig, you should be doing this in the community. Why don't you do this project? I say, no, you do it. I'm good in my lane and I do it well. And this enables me to get results. Yes. So I'm going to do it. You can't go to Apple and tell them, oh, you guys should be doing that. No, because they have the same amount of products. That's what they capitalize on. When you go to the Apple shop, there's not enough products.
No, there's not. There's not. You can count how many products there is actually there.
But they stay in their lane and they do it well. Can't be a jack of all trades and not a master of nothing.
Exactly. I like that one. I always tell people that one, but it's far and few between that actually listen. Most definitely. If there was a banner set up and it was blank, what would you have written on that banner?
Something that my grandparents used to always say, and my dad says it, well, he used to say it a lot when I was growing up. I'm done talking.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
I'm a Caribbean background.
Yes, me too. Yeah.
I'm done talking.
Yeah.
And that's it.
So that's enough. I've heard that throughout my whole life. What is the biggest single suggestion that you would give to someone wanting to go into the same career as you?
Ask that question to me one more time.
What is the single best suggestion you would give to someone wanting to go into the same career as you?
Read. Read.
Yeah.
Read. You can't go into any science, any art, any philosophy unless you read.
That's true.
Passion without intellect is nothing.
Yes.
Knowledge precedes speech and action.
That is true. I agree with that. If there was one quote that represents you as a person, what quote would you choose and why would you choose that quote?
Oh, I've got two.
I'll allow you both.
Okay, so the first one's Frederick Douglass.
Go on.
Without struggle, there's no progress.
Yes, I know that one.
And then the second one, I'm not going to make it claim to anyone. I'm going to say I'm a nan, but it's from the same Jamaican country. Or at least Caribbean. You know, again, I don't want to people start saying, no, that come from us first. I'm not doing that with you today. But tender yard before you dance abroad. Stay home, work with family first, work with yourself first, ensure that you're right before you start working and supporting others, and don't do it the other way around.
Do you find that a lot of people, I was just about to say that, do you find that a lot of people do go out and are trying to mentor people and tell people what to do when they haven't nurtured themselves as an individual?
Most definitely.
And how do you think that ends up?
It becomes a point where you find yourself getting triggered by so many different things. So when I deliver my work with professionals, I talk a lot about reflexive practice, not reflective practice, because one that's reflexive enables one to look at themselves in the mirror before they go outward. So if I'm not strong in my own understanding of my own identity and my own masculinity, then how the hell am I supposed to go out and work with young boys that have toxic mentalities, toxic masculinities? So I believe that understanding self is more important before you start to look at other. And a lot of people go into professions because of past experiences. So I work with a lot of young women that want to do stuff around domestic violence, want to do stuff around victims and survivors of violence, victims of rape, because they were once in that place, but have never gone through a process of healing. So my question to them always is how are you going to heal others if you've never healed yourself?
That's true. Most definitely, that's true.
And I think these are the things that we need to always just bear in mind when we're working with our community, because our community are damaged. You know, our people are damaged. You know, we have intergenerational scars. So if we haven't gone through the process of reading that enables us to have that understanding and that knowledge, then how can we utilize wisdom in order to create change?
That is true. I believe in that. I remember we spoke a little bit about money and charging people, and you going to see your friend and he doesn't charge, and how it impacted him and as a person. Now my question to you is, if you had an unlimited amount of money, so no matter how much you spend, you always got more, Craig, what would you change in the industry that you're in?
I'd have schools, I'd have nurseries, I'd have a hospital, I'd have everything that our society has and the things that we utilize within society but have those things to sustain for ourselves. And it's funny because when we say things like that, people really get quite scared. One thing I just like to say is that our nature is not like the nature of our oppressors. Our oppressors. We're not here for revenge. We're not here to be trying to get people how they got us. What we want is an opportunity, which is a just one, to have a plain level field like everybody else.
That's true.
If we see someone with a school, there is nothing wrong with having a black school. If we see somebody with a nursery, there's nothing wrong with having a black nursery. If we see a hospital, there is nothing wrong with having a black hospital. But what those things are oftentimes, what people are fearful of is our freedom.
Yeah.
Because the perception of our freedom means that they're somehow going to lose something. And the only thing you're going to lose is our servitude and our demanding of your system. But just like in any business, any facet of society where you have multiple streams of the same thing, there is going to be that level of competition. And I say, why don't we welcome it?
No, that's true.
So you've got JD don't complain about Foot Asylum don't complain about Sports Direct. They're each entity that get it in different ways. So I kind of view it as that. I think that when we say that we want freedom and independence, it's kind of seen as, oh, we're trying to kill, hurt, harm, maim people. And as I say it again, it's not the nature of our oppressors. We don't want revenge. We just want freedom, justice, and equality, and to be treated like human beings. And that's it. And that's why I go back to the point of the banner. Mm-hmm. We're done talking.
Yep.
Because I don't feel like we have to keep explaining that to people. We just need to galvanize and just do it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Talk to me about success, Craig. Define what success means to you as an individual, because it means something different to everybody. And I've had so many different definitions of what success means to people.
For me, success is quite simple. Being able to provide for your family.
Yes.
Being able to sustain something that your children and offspring, siblings can benefit from. And that the day that your heart stops and you die, that you will be remembered as an individual that supported the plight for our people. That's what success is to me.
I like that. I definitely like that. What makes you different from other people doing the same thing as you?
I know my lane. Mm-hmm. I invest a lot of time in understanding my lane. Mm-hmm. And I use the minds of our young people to help me stay credible and relevant. And I think that's what makes me different to a lot of people.
So you think that makes you more humble as well in how you do things?
Young people are my teachers.
Yeah.
Whilst I teach them, they teach me. When new slang, new fashion trends. I remember wearing a tracksuit the other day to do some work with some young people, and they all burst out laughing. I thought I was fresh. Said, you think you're some young 17-year-old man? So I said, what, this tracksuit's not working? They was like, nah, it's nice, but nah, not for you, Craig. I said, all right, cool. Vexing, I was vexed. But I'm humble, they teach me, and it is what it is. So when I come next time in my next tracksuit, they're like, yeah, that one's hard still. That one's hard. And I had the crepes to match as well, so I did feel, I'm not going to lie to you, I did feel that was the day when I wanted to take enough pictures with the youths.
Smart. See? Okay. If you had a chance to collaborate with anyone who's influenced you in your life, dead or alive, who would you choose? Oh, he likes this one. Oh my gosh, I've never seen. If you had a chance to collaborate with anyone, dead or alive, who would enhance?
Can I have a few?
Oh, okay, all right. Okay, the reason why I'll say yes to you is simply because of the fact that you've given me such great answers.
Okay. Yeah? I would have loved to collaborate with Marcus Messiah Garvey.
Yes, I understand that one.
I would have loved to collaborate with Malcolm X. I would have loved to sit at the feet and learn from Frederick Douglass. in a contemporary sense, I would have loved to have sat with Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. These are all my favorite teachers, by the way. I would love to sit with Kobe Bryant.
Oh yeah, that's yeah.
I would have loved to have sat with my grandparents.
Oh, that's a nice one.
That one just made me a bit emotional.
I can see that, yeah.
And I think everybody that I want to collaborate with now, I'm either collaborating with or it's on the agenda to collaborate with them.
So if they were all in a room now and you're sitting on a table, they're every single person that you've just mentioned is sitting on a table, what one question would you ask all of them to answer back to you?
I think it'll be more than a sentence. I've provided food for the next 5 days. When nobody's leaving the building, and I want you all to teach me, but I have to put it on camera and it has to be audio.
Fair enough.
And that's it. They're not leaving the building.
Hey, you're locking. So you're locking them in
with food, with unlimited food, drink, and for them to go toilet, sleep, whatever. But they're not leaving.
I would love to see that. I would love to document that and just be the interviewer with you right there, just watching how you do things. How do you push boundaries for yourself and for the people that you work with? Because that's a big question.
I set new tasks and targets, and then I push myself to do it. So if you notice, my vibe is, if you notice that it's been quite a lot of economics.
Yes, totally.
That's my new space. Mm-hmm. I want to know how we can utilize finance to get to where we need to get to, because we are the solution to the problem.
Yes, we are.
I've noticed that there's things that are stopping us from getting there, and I think part of that is just using at the minute, I just think wealth is something that we need to use much better.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think another thing for me is, because of what I love, what I do, is asking the right questions. It's not just asking questions. Anybody can ask you a question, but it's asking the right question and having people challenge that question. Yeah. I think is very important, because then you get the answers that you're looking for, enabling you to be taught like you want to, and then enabling to educate other people. I think that's a big part as well. What's the most embracing moment you have ever had in your life?
Embracing moment. When I first ever went to Africa, I went to the Gambia, and I got off the plane and somebody said, "Welcome home."
I like that.
That stuff just, oh man, I don't care how tough you think you are, man. When you hear stuff like that, you're just like, wow. All of my life, and I'm what I consider home, and you've just gone to one space. I just stepped off the plane. I didn't get to the bottom of the steps of the plane, and the man said, "Welcome home."
I like that. Yeah. How did that make you feel emotionally?
What's the cry, man? You know what? That was my epiphany from I would more say it's from a more conscious perspective. Because that holiday, it was weird, man. I just kept crying. I just feel like that was my it was weird for me, but I understand it in the context now when we talk about healing.
Yeah, maybe that was your spiritual state.
I wanted to know, when I went to kind of the slave dungeons on King James Island, and obviously I learned that many of us that came from Jamaica had went to that island, and then from that island we obviously went to Brazil, to the Americas, or towards Europe. It was a really an awakening, emotional, and a sad time. But it was my epiphany moment that made me think that, my mindset with the gift that has been bestowed upon me, it needs to level up. Yeah. So that was what that whole kind of experience when I first connected to the motherland, and I haven't stopped going since.
Was that more a spiritual connection rather than just a natural connection?
I think it's encompassing of all. Spiritual is one element, but mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically, and anytime that I kind of feel stressed, I'm booking a flight to somewhere on the continent.
Fair enough. It's good because you become even more educated.
I already sense it that I'm going again soon.
See, see,
Because
what?
I'm done talking.
Ay, ay, ay.
See, that's the slogan of the week. I'm done talking.
I think you should get a T-shirt with that on.
Yeah.
If you don't have one already, I think you should get a T-shirt with that on. What is the one thing that people don't know about you, Craig, that you would like to share on the Ask People podcast that you don't say on any other interview?
In a professional sense.
Doesn't matter what it is. It's just coming from your heart.
I'm a big sneaker collector.
Seriously? How many do you have?
That shouldn't be a question. Don't know. You can't get an answer for that. I don't know the answer for that one. It's them levels
wow,
there.
it's that level.
Them levels there.
Fair enough.
I'm a Air Max 1 fan.
Oh, yeah.
I camp outside Foot Locker, outside Size. You know, like how you see the people outside the Apple shop,
Yep.
or you people that want to buy like the latest computer game or whatever.
Yep.
I'll be honest, I'm one of them guys. Yeah, I've got my hobbies and my interests side to all of the stuff that I do.
That's fair enough.
And that's one of them. That's
cool. That's quite cool. What advice would you give to any, your fans or your followers now about staying positive, being optimistic, being educated, and continue to have the consistency to be someone or something great within their life? What advice would you give to them?
That's a hard one. And why it's a hard one for me to answer is because maybe if I explain it, you'll hear the gem within it. I feel like I'm on a roller coaster. So sometimes I'm feeling really positive. Sometimes I'm feeling very proactive, motivated. And other times I just feel really down and low with the things that I'm seeing that's happening to our people locally, nationally, and globally. And I guess the one thing that keeps me going is something that I always tell myself, that our people went through a 600 to 800 years Holocaust. And those of our people that were on those ships, on those plantations, I'm sure many of them would have said, you know what, I can't do this no more. I'm done.
Yeah.
I just want to die now. But there was a vast majority of us that said, nah, we got to keep going forward, and we're not sure where we're going to land or where we're going to end up, but we have to keep hope alive that possibly our children can be in a better situation.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my motivating factor, to know that we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. We stand on the shoulders of those that have come before. We stand on the shoulders of those that had the rebellion, that had the spirit, that had the conviction to want to move forward, despite that people came to us with the sole purpose of destroying us. So whilst I know that, despite the madness that we hear in our communities, despite the way in which people view us and sometimes the way we view each other, I have to believe that can change. I have to believe that. And more importantly, I have children, I have nieces and nephews, I have members of my community, I've got friends' kids that are in these communities. And if I feel that, you know what, it's done and there's no talking to the young people of nowadays, then I might as well just say, then I'm happy for my son to be a criminal, and I'm happy for my daughter to be used and abused by men in our community. I'm happy for my nieces and nephews to be raped, exploited, utilized in a range of different ways that are negative, that are also self-destructive in our community. I can't have that mindset.
Most definitely. My last question for you, Craig, is where can we find you on all your social medias? Tell us about where we can find you.
Okay, so I think Instagram's popping right now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So Instagram's probably the way to catch me right now. So my social handle is Street Academics UK, all one word. So that's Street Academics UK, all one word. On my Twitter, it's Real Action UK. YouTube, just type Craig Pinkney. That's CraigPinkney. People like to say Pinkney, but that's just the Caribbean sense, but it's Pinkney. I'm still doing the history on the people them that have give our people that name. But yeah, so those are the probably best ways to get me. And if you want to kind of see me on my website, where I put all my publications on there and things that you want to learn about more, or if you're interested in working and collaborating with me, that's www.craigpinkney.com. Don't message me if you're not serious. Don't message me if you're someone that sits and procrastinates all day. I like doers. I like people that move forward. I like people that want to connect and move forward in a most positive type of way.
Craig, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Ask People podcast.
It's an absolute honor.
You've been a great guest, and the amount of knowledge that I know will help other people will be inspiring.
I hope this goes viral.
Yeah, I hope so too. Most definitely. I hope so too. Thank you so much. And guys, thank you so much for listening to the Ask People podcast. Please remember you can subscribe to Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or any other platform that you prefer to listen to. Please also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you can also donate to the Ask People podcast so we can continue to speak to wisdom, wiseness from people like Craig. You can simply do that by going on the Savia Rocks website, which is www.saviarocks, or go on to the PayPal or your PayPal account, which is simple by just typing in paypal.me/Ask People podcast. Thank you for listening. Stay happy, stay positive, and please continue to be kind to one another. Thank you so much, Craig.
You're welcome, man.
You take care of yourself.
Yeah, you need a part 2.